Here. My name is Courtney Darby. I'm a representative from Darien CPAC, and I just wanted to start the evening to thank everyone for joining us this evening. We've been doing this program, Colleges Support Service for many years, and we're thrilled to have such a wonderful group panel this evening. We want to start off by thanking our sponsors. We want to thank Darien High School Director of Guidance, Meghan Emanuelson. We want to thank Darien Library, the Darien High School Parents Association, and this year a new sponsor. We're thrilled to have SpedNet Wilton joining us as a sponsor. One thing that we wanted to just start off is also just to make sure that the audience knows, if you, when we get towards the end related to questions, to please put them in the Q&A feature at the bottom, and those questions will be going directly to the panel. So especially want to mention that for any students who are joining us this evening, we are doing that just to make sure that no questions that you have specifically are going to be disclosed to the entire audience. We would want to make sure we're respecting everyone's privacy. So a huge thank you to our moderator and this phenomenal panel of experts that we have. And without any further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Director of Guidance, Meghan Emanuelson.
Thank you, Courtney. Welcome, everybody. I was so thrilled to be asked to join this program again this year. It's truly one of my favorite events. And so thank you so much to CPAC for inviting me back to be a part of it. And as Courtney said, we're so fortunate to have this amazing panel of my higher ed colleagues to share their expertise and their wisdom. They have such information to share on the guidance and services and programs that are available in the collegiate setting for students with IEPs and 504s. The format for this evening is that I'm going to ask each panelist to share a little bit of information about their institution and also about their offices. We have some questions that they will respond to, and we'll certainly try and save some time, as Courtney mentioned, for those questions that will be in the Q&A feature. A reminder that your school counselors are also deeply involved in your post-high school planning, and they're a wonderful resource for any questions that you have after this panel as well. So I would love to take an opportunity to introduce our wonderful panelists that are joining us this evening, and once again, extend our gratitude for your time and expertise this evening. So joining us from the University of Maryland is Tessa Cahill. She is the Interim Director of the Counseling Center, Accessibility and Disability Services. From Hobart William Smith, Susan Pliner. She is the Dean for Teaching, Learning, and Assessment and Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning. From Sacred Heart University, Kathy Radziunas, who is the Director of the Office of Student of Accessibility. From Hofstra University, Julie Yindra, who is the Director of Student Access Service. And joining us from the College Steps program, Bria Emery, who's the Director of Admissions and Enrollment, and Nancy Tishner, who is the Regional Director in the New Jersey Metro region. So I think, as you can see, really awesome variety in our panelists, and I know that they have a lot to share with you this evening. So Tessa, can I ask you to tell us a little bit more about your school and your program?
Thanks for having me. So at the University of Maryland, I think one of the really neat things about my office is that we are underneath the umbrella of the Counseling Center. That is not the case, as you'll hear from other folks on the panel. It's a unique relationship that we have. And what that enables, I feel, for our students is that it kind of provides a one-stop shop for them to get comfortable with a whole variety of help seeking on our campus. We share a building, but we don't share records. So we have folks who are connected and heavily plug into whether it's counseling or accommodations. But we also have folks who just rely more on one. And so for us, it kind of helps destigmatize help seeking, where folks think of the Shoemaker building as a variety of services rather than singling out one particular type of disability. The University of Maryland as a whole is located just outside of DC. So we have a lot of cool programming and things that gets folks out into our nation's capital. And this kind of idea of collaboration across all different areas holds true within our campus community as well. There are a lot of efforts on our campus to strive for offering a variety of programs for all different types of students with disabilities that are not run through my department. One of those is known as SIGNA, and that is specifically, it's a social resource group for students who identify as having autism. And so that support provides social coaching, helping with the dynamics of college readiness. And it provides a lot of social support, which is really great. There's also a program called Succeeds, and that enables students to get a diagnostic evaluation in addition to year-long group or individual coaching for ADHD. And then we similarly have partnerships within our writing center, our oral communications office, and our career center. So we have liaisons in those departments specifically for students with disabilities so that they can plug into resources that are available to all, but also have a particular person with an expertise with a disability lens. So I think all of those programs kind of help round out Maryland. So I hope that kind of gives you a snapshot for us at University of Maryland.
That was awesome. Thank you. Susan, can I move to you?
Thank you all for the invitation. I'm Susan Pliner, and I am in front of Hobart and William Smith colleges, the main buildings. We are a small liberal arts college in the Finger Lakes in upstate New York, in Geneva, New York. And if you've never been to the Finger Lakes, you should definitely come. It's beautiful here. I am the Dean for Teaching and Learning, and I oversee our Center for Teaching and Learning. And our model, much like Tessa was talking about the uniqueness of her model, our model is a little bit different as well. So our Center for Teaching and Learning serves all students. And so there's kind of three arms of what we do. It's student enrichment, disability services, and also faculty enrichment. And that unique combination of having students and faculty engaged together in teaching and learning really kind of speaks to the way that we operate on campus, and faculty mentor and students mentor one another. And so I think it makes us unique. And one of the things that I think benefits our students that are making use of our disability services is that all of the services are open for all students and of the center, with the specifics of disability services, making sure that you are provided the kinds of accommodations that you need for the courses or your campus life. So, so we have things that supports, we have programs that support students like writing fellows that are available for all students at any point in the writing process. We have study mentors that help with the transition to college life or all through college. So time management, note-taking, reading, kind of managing schedules. And we also have teaching fellows, which is one of our largest programs. And that is not supplemental instruction per se, but it is inquiry-based support for learning in right now, 16 departments have teaching fellows. And so they're available every night of the week, except for Friday and Saturday night, to support student learning in those courses in those departments. And on top of the study mentors, if you have an athlete or are an athlete, we have embedded in athletic teams study mentors. They're athletic study mentors that are trained and supervised to support their first year athletes and the transition to college, but also being a scholar athlete. So all of those programs are available to all of our students, and our students with disabilities in particular make good use of those as well. And so disability services sits in that center. And so we have staff that will support students to get the kinds of accommodations that they need in their classes. And we will help to navigate that kind of relationship building with a faculty member in order to get specific within each of those courses. Happy to
Awesome.
answer the
Thank you.
questions.
That's great. Kathy, can I ask you to go next?
Sure. My office is also going to be under our new Center for Teaching and Learning, so I'm very interested in maybe catching up with you later on. We work with students who have disabilities, help them to get their accommodations. We have myself and an assistant director who will meet with students weekly if that's what they need to have a little bit extra support. What we also have, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm getting over a good old-fashioned cold. We also have student success coordinators that can meet with students weekly, bi-weekly. We have students who come in just before finals and midterms because they get anxious. And they can work on everything from time management, study skills, helping students to transition and connect with their professors, because the first thing you want to do in the first 2 weeks when you're a freshman is make sure you make an appointment to meet your professors. And that can be an awkward and uncomfortable situation, and we can help you write the email. We can even have scripts that will help you negotiate what to say when you first get there, especially if you're not going because you have a problem. The student success coordinators are there sometimes just to give you someone to talk to, someone to listen. They can really help out a lot with that. They also will help connect you to all of our other services that we have. We have an amazing tutoring center that for every freshman class, there is a tutor available for you. We have peer tutors. We have professional tutors, which often are professors. And if you get in the upper level classes, and we can't possibly have a tutor for some of those more succinct classes, we have an online service that 24/7 you can get a tutor for some of the upper level, even graduate courses if you need it. We also have a pre-fall program our department puts on. It's called Start Strong, and that's primarily students who come to our section, our students who have disabilities. And you'll come a week early to campus, get to stake your claim in your dorm room, what bed you want. And then from 8 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, you attend different activities. A lot of them are social, a lot of them are to get you used to the campus and get to know it around, but we also have you write your first paper. You do your first group presentation, you do some math work, kind of taking the sting out of that first time. So that when everybody else moves into onto campus, you're kind of the campus expert and you end up helping everybody else out. That is a fee-based program. I do want to let you know that. I talked about the tutoring. We have our online writing lab that a lot of our students with disabilities take advantage of, where you submit a paper and it gives you back, edits it and gives you back some recommendations. The professors love when you do that. We also hired last year brand new learning specialists. And we're finding that we can take a student who's struggling and has accommodations. They can spend time with Wendy and she'll help them learn about their learning style, which is really important information for a student to have. And then she will help them to discover tools that work within that learning style. And then they can go back to meeting with the student success coordinator, or they can go back and try it on their own. And we also are working to create resources for faculty so that they can understand different people learn different ways, and they might have to address something differently for a student. I think that, we also have an ASP program for freshmen in the second semester. A student who is struggling and has a lower GPA ends up in this program. It's just an hour a week, and we go over a lot of those transition tools, a lot of the test taking skills, writing skills, and resources in general. We talk about perseverance and grit and help give students a little bit extra support so that they can try to bring their GPA back up and stay with us.
That's great. Thank you so much. Julie?
Hi, everyone, and thanks for inviting me to this event. I visited the Darien Library for this event a few years ago, and I'm glad to be back with you all again. I am the Director of Student Access Services at Hofstra University. Hofstra is on Long Island, about 20 miles east of Manhattan. And so we definitely, in terms of our curriculum offerings and internship offerings, take full advantage of being close to New York City. Hofstra is the largest, I'm going to put my admissions cap on for about 2 seconds. It's the largest private university on the island. It is known for a couple of things. One is its School of Communication, Radio, Television, Film. It has an award-winning radio station on campus. In fact, in the 13 years that I've been at Hofstra, most of those years, it has been voted the best college radio station in the country. So the School of Comm deserves a lot of props. They do some terrific work. Also, the fastest growing programs that we have right now are programs in our School of Health Professions. We have a brand new undergraduate School of Nursing to complement our graduate School of Nursing and our medical school and law school. And we are also a very quickly growing School of Computer Science and Engineering. Those are gaining in popularity. But as far as what's going on my side of campus, I'm hearing a trend from the things that other folks have been talking about. When I first went into this line of work, the Disability Services office was in the basement at the end of a hall in a corner, and the door was always closed. And it was kind of like that making sausages analogy, like nobody ever knew what was going on behind that closed door, but somebody would emerge with a letter that said, "These are my accommodations," right? That has changed. We are a large and vibrant office. We serve a large number of students, and we are part of the student success team at Hofstra. So we are partnered along with the department that runs all the tutoring offices, the writing center, the math learning center. We have a close partnership with the career center because we really believe at Hofstra that my job in providing disability support services doesn't end right before you graduate, right? My job not only is to make sure that you have a smooth transition into college, but that you also have a smooth transition to the next step after college, which might be graduate school and might be a job in your chosen field. So we do a lot of collaborative work. We serve a lot of students at Hofstra. About 15% of the undergraduate population at Hofstra is registered with my office for one reason or another. We are an umbrella office, student access services that provides all accommodations and supports for students with any kind of disability. So on my staff, I have folks that are mental health and counseling certified. I have professional learning specialists. I have an assistive technology specialist. So we really are a full service operation that serves a great many students. We have, in addition to the general services that we offer to any student who comes through our door, we also have some very intensive and fee-based and specialized programs. We have the PALS program for students with learning disabilities and or ADHD that's been around since the late 70s. We have an academic coaching program that I started about 10 years ago, which is also fee-based and which is really aimed at helping students with that, developing more effective time management, organizational skills, getting that GPA up, working with a specialist on specific, goals that the student may have. And I am also very proud to announce that after several years in the making, we are launching this fall the Lattice program, which is a program specifically designed for meeting the social, emotional, and academic needs of students on the autism spectrum. So we have a lot going on. A little bit about the background of Hofstra and kind of the reason I went to work there. I've been in this line of work for 30 years, and I packed my bags and sold my house and moved to Long Island to take the job as the director at Hofstra, knowing a couple of things. One, that PALS program for students with learning disabilities has been around since the late 70s. And also, you can't tell because you can only see me from the shoulders up, but I'm sitting in a wheelchair. And I know, one of the things I know about Hofstra is that it is the first private university in the country to become fully wheelchair accessible. And so that was part of the reason, that legacy is part of the reason that I came to work at Hofstra. We are a large university that's busy and has a lot going on, but disability inclusion has been a hallmark of our culture for decades. So that's my spiel.
Thank you so much. Bria or Nancy, can you tell us more about the College Steps program?
Absolutely. Good evening. Lost track of time here today. My name is Bria Emery. I'm the Director of Admissions and Enrollment here for College Steps, and I'm joined by my coworker, Nancy Tishner, who's our Regional Director. To tell you guys a little bit about us, we are a nonprofit organization that partners with colleges and universities to provide personalized learning plans to students working in kind of like an IEP segment. So we created our own ICP, we call it that as a play on words. So an individualized college plan focusing on 4 key areas. So students creating goals around academic enrichment, social engagement, independent living, and pre-employment training. And what we're really there to do is to bridge the gap between where a student was in high school and having their school really help them with self-advocacy and all of the components that they now have to be responsible for in the college, bridging the connections to all of these departments that my colleagues here have talked about with tutoring services and so on and so forth, including career services and all the other offices on campus. And we do so through a model of peer mentorship. So while we're all wonderful, we hire other students who have been through the process who can help our students learn their college, learn where to go, be comfortable on the campus, access not only the resources that every other student's already accessing, but also providing that social support as they learn that new environment. And that's really crucial to the students we work with, especially around being advocates for themselves for all those supports. What's really unique about what we do as a partner is that we partner right now with 13 campuses from Vermont to Virginia. So in Connecticut, in your region, that includes Norwalk Community College. We partner with both high school districts for 18 to 21 services. We also partner with families privately after graduation, and we can talk more about that individually. I work with every family who applies or is interested to our program. So there's always step-by-step instructions. You never have to feel like you have to figure it out on your own with College Steps. We're walking you through the process from the beginning, whether that's with your school district or post-grad. I think one really unique thing about our program too is because we're not a siloed program and our students are students of the campus, we don't give tours of our program, but we do offer sessions where families talk about their experiences. And often, while I can talk all day about our programming and tell you all about it, and so can Nancy, it's often really wonderful to hear directly from our students and mentors and teams about their experiences. Nancy, do you want to add on?
No, I think you covered it all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all for that amazing overview. I'm so excited to learn more about your programs, and certainly I think it's evident, just the variety of different services and how it can look different at each university, which is important for our families to know as they're, exploring their post-high school options, to ask these questions about the kinds of programs and services that exist. So one of the most common conversations that we're having is that a student's IEP or 504 in high school doesn't necessarily directly translate to the supports that they'll receive in a collegiate environment. And so can you talk a little bit about maybe just some of the common supports or some of the typical supports? Extended time, of course, I think is fairly standard, but what are some of the common supports or accommodations that students might receive at the collegiate level?
We have over 900 students that get accommodations, and almost 700 of them have extended time on test or separate testing environment. It's very common. Depending on the disability, it is something that will help remove a barrier for a lot of students. The other one is extended time on assignments. Right now, we usually try to keep it at 48 hours beyond due date, because if they have the full semester, then they get really sacked at the end. Somebody else want to add in?
I'll jump in and say that, there's a lot of students that can either sit quietly in a classroom and watch the professor and listen and digest and understand what's happening, or they can take copious notes, right? But they can't do both things at the same time. I have students come into my office and I'll say, how was your biology class? And they'll say, oh, it's great. I have 6 pages of notes. And I'll say, what was the lecture about? I don't know. So we, the traditional note-taking accommodation used to be either here's a tape recorder, right? Or I'm going to give somebody in the class a piece of carbon paper, or ask somebody in the class to make a copy of their notes. And, there's problems with that methodology for lots of reasons. One is that it's very passive, right? To stare at somebody else's notes is, not an active participation in the learning process. It makes you dependent on what somebody else thinks is important. The other problem that you have with note takers in the classroom is you have other 19-year-old students who say, oh, sure, I'll do that, no problem. And then 3 weeks in, your student has their first exam coming up and they say, I'm not getting my notes. And you go chasing down the note taker and he says, I dropped that class 2 weeks ago. Right. So we now are at Hofstra, there's a lot of technology out there that can accommodate this particular need. And we are at Hofstra using a note-taking program called Otter Artificial Intelligence, Otter AI. And it audio records, it provides a transcript, and it allows the student to pull in multimedia pieces like PowerPoint slides and other pieces that will sync with the audio and allow the student to create their own set of notes after the fact using the audio and the notes provided by the professor, as well as the transcript. And so those are fairly common things, but I think the question may also be asking what's maybe things that my student might be getting in high school that are not appropriate in college. And I'll tell you one that I see all the time. It's called priority seating. It's for the kid who has difficulty paying attention. You know what priority seating is in college? Schedule your classes to have breaks in between your classes and go to class 10 minutes early and sit in the front.
Having worked with numerous colleges, I think it changes based on the college too. Some colleges will offer things that they find appropriate while other colleges do not. And I was a K-12 educator for a number of years before coming to College Steps, and having worked with families, I think the biggest and most important piece families can take into consideration is that there are generally no modifications in the college curriculum. So any changes to the curriculum, what's being learned, even on many college campuses, due dates are not flexible. And what we found is students with skills for self-advocacy who have that support to talk with their professors earlier The good news is, even though there's no modifications, professors are more and more increasingly being very compassionate to their students and want to set up their students for success. So giving students the skills to talk directly to their professor early on about what their struggles are can sometimes take the place of some of those other supports that they received in high school that they won't receive in college.
We're a small liberal arts college, and we really focus on kind of the mentorship and community building, et cetera. So we do have a traditional note-taking program, but we have technology where the students are getting those notes right away. So, but it's on campus, and we have students that have it as a job, and it's part of their identity on campus as being note takers in courses. But I'm gonna give you an example of one of the things that we also offer digital texts. Students that are listening to their readings, we will provide that. I mean, that's pretty common as well. And like Nancy said, there's modifications to the curriculum aren't necessarily an accommodation. They're not an accommodation. But for instance, I got a call last week right before spring break from one of our physics professor and said, Susan, I've got the student, and the student's disability is bumping right up against this particular unit that we're having, and we're having an exam, and she's already approached me about it, and I don't think that she's going to do well on the exam as the way it's written, and I just don't know what to do. Right. So because I'm also the faculty developer and I work with faculty on their teaching and their scholarship, she felt like she could call me and have that conversation. And so we were able to have a conversation about, well, what about the material do you want for her to actually know? Like, does she have to represent it in the way that you are giving the test to everybody else? And it turned out that this is the faculty member really wanted this student to be able to articulate their learning, and gave her that section of the exam verbally, and everybody was happy. So while there's no modifications to the curriculum per se, students that, like Nancy said, are able to self-advocate, and we work with them on those skills and helping them to understand. And what I would say to you as parents and students, the more you know yourself and the more you're able to articulate what you know about yourself as a learner, the better off you're going to be in all settings. So that's one of the ways that we are. That's one of the things that we do on our campus as well. But I also just want to say that there are some common, obviously, IEPs don't travel over to higher education, but the process of individualized accommodations do. Right. So it's not a checklist that you pick off of. It really is dependent on who you are as a learner, what kind of disabilities that you have, how those are connecting to one another, and the setting in which you're in. And it may be different in a biology course than it is in a Shakespeare course. And so those are the ways that we're talking to you based on the courses that you're in and the type of learner that you are.
Well, at University of Maryland, we're a D1 institution, and we are just shy of 50,000 students on our campus. So we're a very, very large research-based institution. But what I will say is, as you're exploring where you want to go, it's very important that you find where you're comfortable. You don't want to, I'll say, be distracted by the shiny types of things. So I know I read an article, I forget, there's a school down in Texas, but they have like one of those lazy pools where, for studying, where, just lazy river where you sit. So that's a great feature, but that's may or may not be helpful to the purpose of getting your degree. So I always think it's very important for folks to first and foremost feel comfortable where you're going, whether it's how far away from home you are. My parents, I'm originally a New Yorker. And so my mom drew this 3-hour radius because she said she wasn't driving, to the other side of the country for me. But back to the, sorry, I got off on a tangent there, but when it comes to accommodations, I think what is also important for you as families to understand is what is reasonable. So throughout the COVID, I'll say era, University of Maryland, we're an in-person institution, very limited classes that are offered online. And so when we had to transition, we have started to have a lot of students request that they be allowed to attend their classes virtually, or that the attendance requirement does not apply to them. So we have seen an increase of folks asking for those types of things, but at the end of the day, you have to think, is it reasonable? So in high school, it may be appropriate that if you have a significant medical condition, that maybe your high school is going to send a home tutor to make sure you don't fall behind in the curriculum, or they might say, whatever semester, trimester, or quarters you're on, those timelines don't matter. We'll just say you can have until whenever you get it in. But in college, semesters start and ends at a particular point, and our offices, we can't change that. So like if you're absent for Maryland, we have 15-week semesters. So if you miss a month of school, you have to then also be realistic, is can I make up a month of work while still having to turn everything in on time as I go? So some of the things that may be appropriate, as we were talking about in the high school environment, it may not be reasonable. But that's why there are university-wide policies or procedures like deadlines to withdraw, or the ability to work with your professor and take an incomplete. So you do have that flexibility, but it's equity for all. And that's why big umbrella policies and procedures help all offices on campus have an outline for how should we strive forward moving together.
Yeah, I agree with what everybody's saying. And the word reasonable, Tessa, is important for a couple of reasons. Several folks have said to that the IEP doesn't really carry over from high school to college. And that's because the IEP is a function of IDEA, which is the education law that governs the provision of special education. And Section 504 of the Rehab Act of 1974 provides, for mandatory accommodations for students with conditions that may be an impediment. But when you transfer to college, Section 504 and really the prevailing law that governs college is not education law. It's the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is civil rights law, right? And so the reason the term reasonable is so important is because the Americans with Disabilities Act says that higher education institutions have to provide what is determined to be reasonable accommodations to level the playing field for students with disabilities so that they can have an equal opportunity in competition with their non-disabled peers. The problem with that is that colleges kind of get to define what reasonable means within certain boundaries, right? So you have to shop, right? You have to visit the colleges in person. You have to talk to the people who do what we do to find that right fit. And part of the right fit is going to be the services and the level of support that you feel that your student needs from the disability service, the access office. But it's also going to be what majors do you offer and how big are you? And are you, in a suburban area or a metro area? All of those things are going to be factors, and you really have to shop for the right fit, the place where your student's going to feel like they have a home for 4 years or more.
So Julie, that's actually an amazing segue to my next question. It's perfect setup there. So as the students start to look towards the admissions process, knowing that, most of you are not necessarily working in admissions, you are working with admissions usually. Does the student's disability or plan play any role in admissions? And we always get the question, should a student disclose their disability or their plans and their needs in the admissions process? And at what point should they do that if you advise that they should disclose?
I think what is very important for families to understand is that our offices really shouldn't, I'll use the term influence the admissions process, in that here at College Park, I have no idea if you write a beautiful essay on how your disability intersects with fill in the blank. Our offices don't communicate with each other in that manner. So I think it's very important, if you decide to disclose, know that if anything that is disclosed to the admissions office is not shared with any other office. That's how it works at the University of Maryland. But I do feel when it comes to your admissions essay, more often than not, you get to pick a question. They give you a variety of essay options. And my best advice is answer the question to your best ability. And if it's like, talk about your favorite pet when you grow up, if your disability is related to that relationship with your pet, then it is your decision to put it in there, but you don't have to feel obligated to disclose or share any information if there's no nexus to what you're writing about. So I think you can disclose as much as you'd want, but it's also, it won't hurt you in any way if you decide to not share. In the same way, it won't hurt you if you do share. So the best advice I have is to answer the question and write the best essay that shows why are you a rock star, and why that wherever you're applying to, why should they pick you? And that's what you should focus on in your admissions essays.
At College Steps, we'll help students through that process, but I think the most important advice I can give is to make a plan together and with your other support people about what the student is comfortable with, because I think it will be individualized. And I think a few key things that families and students don't always know, it is up to the student to disclose. Even when you're in classes, that will not be disclosed by anyone except the student if they choose to, if they have a disability and what that disability is, and even their accommodations is something that they can choose to disclose or use, and it's completely up to them. I think another important piece is this is the first situation for all 18-year-olds where they have to take on full adult responsibilities. Colleges are going to be communicating with the student. They're going to get emails to their email address. They're going to be requested for their paperwork for the Accessibility Services Office. And while everyone is as supportive as possible, we've heard the numbers at many of these campuses. So definitely understanding how that's the disability informs the support the student needs should also be a part of that plan. And talking with that together and the other support people, so you know where you can lend your support behind the scenes versus where the student is really going to have to start to take the wheel themselves.
I also want to add something to what Tessa said, and I agree with her. It is totally up to you how to disclose, when to disclose, if to disclose prior to enrollment, right? Of course, you have to disclose if you are coming to the university and want to seek accommodations. You have to do what we call self-identify. Find the person who does what we do, make yourself known to them, and provide whatever paperwork. But the college can't ask you if you have a disability. And if you do happen to disclose that information, as Tessa said, they're not allowed to discriminate against you in terms of your admission to the university. But I'm also going to say something else. If you are applying to a college and you get the sense that upon disclosing that information, there is some discomfort emanating from the university admissions counselor, or if there's some clearing of the throat or rolling of the eyes, or if you get the sense that this is problematic for this university, whatever accommodations you may require, I guess my question is, why would you want to go there? Why do you want to go somewhere where you're not welcomed?
I think a good way to kind of test that theory out is when we have students that come in for tours or whatnot. A lot of the students that work that are students that are very comfortable in working with our department and have disabilities. So you almost see them kind of beam if they get a question with that, and they'll give a true sense of how folks who do disclose having a disability are treated throughout the campus. And it's usually the feedback I get from the parents later on is that it's usually a positive experience and really help them, like you said, tease out whether this is going to be a place that's, you know, it's kind of the who you're going to be around can be more important than the, like you said, the shiny new building or that fantastic gym. And that's one way to tease out if that is a true, genuine part of the university.
If you're at the beginning phases, even just checking the website. Sometimes the website isn't accessible, and that can be a clue right off the bat as well.
So, and just to add, so one of the things that our school counselors will do when a student has decided where they're going to enroll is to help do a little bit of that research in terms of, helping the student to identify what documentation they might need to bring if they wanted to seek supports, or who they might need to contact, the timing of it. Every university seems to have a different process and different timing. Sometimes they want you to do it, in the spring, sometimes it's over the summer or when you arrive on campus. And so that's one of the things that school counselors are happy to do with kids and families, is to help to do some of that research about what's going to be needed if you want to seek supports. So thank you all. That was super helpful. A lot of our students with IEPs are receiving direct service through like a resource room. We call it a learning center. Is there a model at the collegiate level like that where they would be working directly in a learning center or resource room support, or with a case manager? How does that service translate, or does it translate?
Some of us have mentioned what we call our fee-based programs, like Kathy and I
Mine's not
mentioned.
fee-based, sorry.
Oh, I thought it was.
No, it's not fee-based,
You had a
not at all.
fee-based program. Tessa. So if it's fee-based, it's probably something that is direct instruction, one-on-one, and it's probably over and above the general support services that are offered to any student at the university.
Our student success coordinators are one-on-one and above, and any student with or without disabilities can meet with them. And very often freshmen kind of need that for the transition aspect of it. And they have had students that they stayed with the whole time, the whole 4 years, and met with them. But we don't have any sort of a resource room. I think that it would be a specialty program like you talked about, Julie, that, checking in the morning and making a plan and then checking how you're doing it and executing it in the evening kind of thing. But there are other supports. Each college has a dean of student success in it also, in addition to academic advisors. So there's a multiple layer that it might work for you here, but not there.
One thing I think, bear with me, I really like corny analogies, so hopefully this will make some of you smile. But at the high school level, oftentimes the only way you're eligible to plug in for extra help, whether that be connecting with your teachers or any of the support offered in resource room, one of two categories are really the only way you access those things. One is if you have a disability, or two is if you're failing. So when I work with a lot of students who transition into the college environment, sometimes that doesn't always leave the best taste in their mouth, whether it was you felt like you were smothered, that no one listened to what you actually needed and you were overly supported, or it felt like you were having to pull teeth, where you're like, just because I get A's and B's doesn't mean I don't need accommodations. And so when you step over into the college environment, as Julie was mentioning, the laws change. So you go from education laws to civil rights laws. But the other thing that changes for all students, regardless of disabilities, is the change from an entitled K through 12 in education to now this is people in college are going there because they want to be there. It's not something that you just get because you live in the United States. And ultimately, supports are offered for everybody with or without a disability. That's why offices like a writing center exist. On my campus, we have something called an oral communication center. So that's all things help public speaking and presentations. Tutoring is available for all students. So it really is this mentality shift of why are we limiting who we allow to plug into all these extra supports? And it now becomes the folks who plug into those are now your AB students because they are engaged and take ownership of their education rather than viewing it as, oh, tutoring is for people who are failing. Not true. On the college level, it all flips. And so my corny analogy is if you are a student who likes to watch YouTube videos, like, you know that, oh, if I don't know how to do something, I'll watch a video. Someone will show me how to do it. Use that same mentality to plugging into any of these support services on your college campuses, because it doesn't mean anything about you not having the capabilities. It shows that you know where to go to someone who knows more than you. And if anything, if you just take that silly analogy away, that will be invaluable no matter where you end up going, not only at college, but in life, knowing that there's no way you can know all the things. So just go to someone who knows more to help you figure it out.
I think my piece of advice there too is to know why you're receiving those things. So again, we were talking about the difference between modifications and accommodations. Actually going to a resource room is a modification because there's a drastic change in the environment and how you're being taught there. So, and what I've observed is most colleges do not provide a resource room setting, not just the colleges here on this call. It's just not something that's done in college. But I think knowing why do you need a case manager? Why do you learn better in a resource room? If you can empower the student with the information that went into making those decisions, which might have been made in kindergarten, right? They might not have been ready yet. But if they're a junior or senior, make sure they know why. And then figure out how you can lean on your current support. So, College Steps, we do have someone similar to a case manager. We have a program coordinator who will help monitor the students' progress, who will touch base with them daily. It looks very similar to a high school case manager. And so if you know you need that, then you're going to be looking at schools or other programs that do provide that high touch situation. But if you're really in a resource room setting because you need that extra tutoring, then you might not need someone in a case management position. It might be better if you know that you can go to the tutoring center, or you know that your professors teach in small class sizes. So it's all about, again, making sure the student knows why they received that modification, why they received those services, and helping them discover the equivalents that will still serve that same purpose in the college setting for them.
Nancy, that's really important. But I think that we don't want to miss the fact that you can't get accommodations if you don't request them. So these other resources are phenomenal and will help you out in addition or sometimes in place of. It depends on what your needs are. But I can't tell you the number of times that I've been frustrated mid-semester after midterm. Students come in, I need my accommodations. I had a 504. I didn't think I wanted to do without it. I didn't want to be that kid anymore. And then they're sitting there and they're suffering and needlessly going through extra work that they didn't need to do, going around the back of the barn, I call it, to get through the front door. Whereas if they come in at the beginning, they bring their documentation. They don't have to hunt for it, have mom and dad trying to dig for it at the school. They get it all signed, sealed. We sign the accommodations, and then they get to decide who gets that information. So they might be a biology whiz, and they're not going to give the accommodation letter to that biology professor, but writing is really hard for them. So they're going to use their accommodations there. And at any time, a click of a button, they can enact that letter in that class if they start struggling. So again, it's always their control. It's always their choice, but it's so much better to have it there just a click away instead of having to take the energy when you're high stress because you're struggling and try to gather everything up together.
That That was all such great advice. I appreciate that so much. And
And-
as the mother of college age students, one of the biggest adjustments for myself and my kids was that like parents really have no interaction at the collegiate level. The expectation really is that the kids are managing it. And so for students where that self-advocacy that you mentioned might still be an emerging skill, or they're going to a school and they just don't know what the resources are or how to access it. Like, is your office the place they should start? Like, how do they get comfortable having those conversations and knowing what supports are available to them?
We tell all of our incoming students during the admitted students days and the summer orientation periods that our office is one-stop shopping. We invite students in a very friendly way to come chat with us. Of course, when students come for orientation, our office also gets flooded by parents who want to come in and say, here's my son's paperwork. He needs extra time on exams and a note taker, but you can't tell him. Every year this happens, right? And so it is a really harsh reality in an education for parents. But what I always tell parents is, look, we're happy to hear from you. We're happy to hear what you have to say. We're happy to have you introduce your son or your daughter, but they have to be driving the bus. And the phrase that I always use in terms of what our attitude is about parent involvement is an old motto from the disability rights movement, which is nothing about us without us. So if you want to come in and have a chat with me, that's fabulous. But your son or your daughter needs to be in the room and be part of the conversation.
Can I also add in? I mean, I think I made reference to it, and I think folks are also making reference as well. And so for students that have had IEPs for a long time, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, they know more about their learning than they probably think they do, right? Even though they've had IEPs and they've, you've had meetings without them, and their teachers have meetings without them, et cetera. The goal is for them to understand their documentation, their testing, and what it really means with the examples, like, right? So, I have an auditory processing deficit. That's what my documentation says. What does that mean for me in a classroom? How is it different for me in this type of environment or this type of environment? And the more that they are able to engage with understanding that and knowing that for themselves, that is like gold, right? So if you have a kid that has not seen their documentation and you haven't reviewed it with them and they don't understand it, that is going to be a real deficit for them when they come to college, because like Julie was saying, they have to navigate for themselves. And I know from my campus, and I've been on a lot of college campuses, so it's every college campus, faculty have individual privilege to run their courses the way they're going to run their courses. And we are all really good. And I know my faculty really well, but I'm not going to be the one sitting in the classroom with them and hearing the assignments. And so the only way to be accommodated and have full access is really for them to be able to communicate with a faculty member what they know. They don't have to say, hey, I have this disability, but they do have to say, remember that letter that I handed you? This is what it means in this context. And I'm wondering if you and I can talk about how I can best demonstrate my learning to you.
I think this is a struggle for all college students, not just neurodiverse students. I was housed on my campus for a long time, right in the student center, and I could see, students walking up with their parents to the window or calling mom or dad in the middle of the day. So I think something that makes our program a little unique is that we do coach the families through this process, right? Many of our parents will come to us that first week and be like, I have to email the professor. He doesn't know his accommodations. And And we're there to be like, no, actually, it would be kind of detrimental if you email the professor and also the professor's not going to talk to you. So we provide that coaching to you. If it makes you really nervous as a parent to think about your student having to do all these things on their own, we do provide that support in our program through our program coordinators. And then we also help you identify what the student can take on their own. In an ideal world, your student is attending their IEP meetings, probably starting from middle school, I've heard some experts advise, but ideally in their senior and junior year, and they are having these conversations. But we know 17-year-olds, they're not always ready for this. So if you're 17-year-old or 18-year-old, you're really nervous about them handling all this on their own, looking for a program that does have someone who is going to have an advisor specific to their accessibility services or their disability services, using a program like College Steps that will provide that high touch person to also facilitate communication to you. So you know what's going on and can be coached on how you can support the student in a very different environment.
That's awesome. Courtney and Sarah, I think we had some questions that were submitted. So I think we'll maybe turn it over to some, certainly people can continue to add to the Q&A, but we'll take some family questions.
Perfect. And just as a quick segue, because I know this was just sort of referenced, was could someone speak a little bit about the kinds of documentation typically requested for accommodations?
I'll try that. Your 504 and your IEP is great information for us to have. It provides a lot of insight and it'll help guide you through our conversation, but it's not considered the legal documentation for ADA accommodations. So what we need is something from a clinical specialist that has to do with your particular disability. So if you have ADHD, at some point somebody diagnosed you. Hopefully it's within 3 to 5 years that you have some documentation from that clinical specialist that says you still have ADHD. We usually require some sort of testing also. If you have a learning disability, it might be a learning specialist at your school that, or it might be your psychologist, your school psychologist might provide documentation, but it does need to be dated and signed by that clinical expert. And a lot of times they will make recommendations for accommodations that will help you, but we are not bound to facilitate those exact accommodations. It's a conversation that we have with you. To be honest with you, once you get the documentation and our intake form completed, the most important part of the process is our conversation with you and what you know works for you, what you've tried and hasn't worked. And the last thing I'll say about that is with the documentation, we can revisit it if things aren't working for you. So it's an ongoing changing process. As you change, we can change with you, but we will go back to that documentation for the original diagnosis from the clinical specialist.
I will also say it's important for folks to know in the K through 12 environment, the school district is often responsible for paying for updated evaluations, typically either on a 3 or 5 year cycle. But once you leave the K through 12 environment, if you do ever need to get updated documentation, it would be the individual's responsibility to pursue getting that. And my office and every office nationwide, there's a professional organization known as the Association of Higher Education and Disability, and they give guidance to us that, and this also ties into the Americans with Disabilities Act. When the Amendments Act were passed in 2008, they basically told us as providers, stop being the barrier for people to access things. So if you've had excuse me, ADHD, you were diagnosed when you were 7, you've had an IEP throughout, and what you're coming to college for is, I just want to have extra time, and here's a stack of documents this big that all support that. We would not then say, oh, your stuff is too old, you're out of luck. That would be unreasonable for you as a family. But if you came in and said, I want to have a foreign language substitution, we might need to have some updated documentation. So it all comes down to what are you asking for, but we do, just because it is of a certain age, you're not automatically disqualified. So that's why, as Kathy was saying, that conversation piece is so important, because it's going to help us understand, do we need more to be able to know if something's reasonable and appropriate?
Absolutely. I think what Kathy and Tessa were saying is, it used to be there was very strict rules about what current documentation, how that was defined, and that has changed over time. If you can show a lifetime of condition and a consistent support for that condition, that's going to be very helpful. The documentation that's required will depend on the particular college or university, right? And what their particular documentation requirements are. It'll depend on the scope, the nature of the disability. So if you have a psychiatric condition, a detailed letter from a psychiatrist that outlines your diagnosis and how it impacts you is probably going to be sufficient in order to demonstrate your need. It's individualized to a great degree. But the other thing that a lot of us have realized is that during COVID, even those of us who have had fairly strict standards in terms of the currency of your documentation, we know that across the United States during COVID, lots and lots and lots of students never got retested when they were supposed to, according to the triennial evaluation schedule dictated by IDEA. A lot of school districts just did not provide that service. So, we're mindful of that, and we're being as lenient as we possibly can to make sure students don't come to college and not be able to get the services that they need.
I'm going to add on one little extra caveat to that, though, because we definitely have guidelines and for documentation, and totally COVID has messed that up. But what I would say is, if you're in a school district, and certainly this is disability dependent, right? Like if you were blind at birth, you don't need to get reevaluated to be blind, at 18, right? But there are some disabilities where, the developmental process, growing up, getting strategies, those things change, right? And so the documentation, like we asked for documentation within the last 3 years for a couple of reasons. One is it is the most accurate representation of who you are as a learner, which then helps us the best to help you in the differing, types of learning environments that you're going to be in, right? So testing from when you were 5 years old, even if you still have ADHD, isn't going to help us to make sure that you are getting all the things that you need in your classes. So, and also if you're intending to go on to graduate schools, if you're going to go to law school, or you're going to take the GREs, those things matter in terms of updated testing as well. So just to balance those things out, yes, it's not like there's a barrier, but it's also a benefit if you're able to have updated testing.
Yeah, and I think I would also add that the evaluation can be waived by the IEP team. So even if sometimes the student doesn't want to sit through the test, this is the one where the psychiatrist meets with them and maybe the speech therapist, and it can be lengthy. So a lot of times I've noticed teams will waive that for a few years. So it's always helpful to just check with your IEP team, and most of the time it's actually right on the IEP, to make sure that you are getting, you do have an evaluation that has been within the past 3 years.
Great, thank you so much for that.
Sorry,
One
Courtney,
other,
I just want to let families know that we can provide copies of whatever, whatever the testing that we've done, anything in our files, a copy of the most recent IEP or 504. So we can certainly help in providing families with putting together the documentation package that they'll need. And again, the school counselors are happy to help to look at, again, it varies depending on the disability, depending on the school, what is required, when it's required. And so we'll certainly assist families in getting that together in any way that we can.
and having been through that for myself, I will say Darienne's fantastic about getting you and helping you through that process for sure too. One other question that we got was about any kind of living accommodations or social supports that your schools might offer.
So we offer housing accommodations, again, establishing that there's a true barrier, either accessing the housing or accessing other school amenities because of your need. We just finished that process today, as a matter of fact. So you have to go through the same process, even if you have already received academic accommodations, the housing requirements are different. And we will do our best to meet your need, but sometimes it has to do with the availability of resources. Limited number of single rooms, for an example. So if I have a student who has needs someone physically to help get them dressed and ready for the day, I'm probably going to give them a single room before I'd give someone who needs a single room who had anxiety or something like that. It's not that one is more important than the other, it's that the need can be met in different ways compared to the other one. Excuse me. So that's our housing accommodations. You do have to provide additional documentation that speaks specifically to that need for a housing accommodation.
Yeah, we have housing accommodations too. And like many others, the student has to work not just with our office, but also in compliance with the timing and the required paperwork through the residence life office to provide what they need on their timeline. And as Kathy said, there's a finite number of rooms on any campus. And so, yes, we do provide single rooms for students when it is determined that it is in their best interest. But one of the questions that the provider has to answer on the form that they have to fill out for this says, given the additional isolation that is inherent in a single room, is a single room still in the best interest of the student? So, we're cognizant that for some students, they may think they might feel more comfortable in a single, but it might not be medically in their best interest. And also, there's a limited number of wheelchair accessible rooms. So that single, like Kathy said, might have to go to somebody who's a wheelchair user who has a personal care attendant that comes in and out every day to assist them, rather than somebody who would like to have a single for a variety of reasons.
At Maryland, we also do housing accommodations, and pretty much any accommodation you would need because you're a student, whether it's employment, housing, dining, all is through our office. But one thing I think is important when it comes particularly to housing, some institutions have certain features that are just standard for all, like air conditioning, as an example. At the University of Maryland, not every residence hall has air conditioning. So some of the things that in our documentation that you would give to your provider, we're looking at not only in terms of medical necessity, but we're also asking them, do they have any other recommendations for things they think could be helpful? So when it comes to housing-based accommodations, not everything, this applies for all accommodations, but just because it's recommended doesn't mean, again, that it's reasonable. And some things fall outside the purview of having a nexus to disability. So for example, asking to have a roommate, that there's a separate process for a roommate request that you don't have to, disclose a disability just to live with, your best friend. So just being mindful of that too.
So for College Steps as a nonprofit, and we're not the college. We work with the colleges. We do not provide residential support. However, we provide extensive social support to students. So providing them a mentor to go to clubs or activities on campus or sometimes even off campus are really important for the students that we work with. And we also provide some of our own internal clubs and activities as well through our cross-campus sessions.
Yeah, something I'd like to add that I don't think we've mentioned yet is that our mentors are hired, paid, and trained by us. So that means our social support can actually become very individualized. Our mentors are required to attend a weekly supervision with our instructional coordinator, where they are able to say, here, this is what the student's struggling with. How can I best support them in their clubs or meeting people on campus, or they're oversharing in conversations? How do I help? And then on the other end, we are also providing group trainings about the skills of what makes a great support person be able to help socially. So they're learning kind of those professional skills as well. And then they can just blend in. Like it's never going to be obvious that they're a mentor going to the cafeteria with them on campus. So it's a really great support system. And then I've mentioned our program coordinators a couple of times. They also provide intensive social support. Our program coordinators are highly qualified professionals coming from the world of education or special services. And they get to meet with the student on a weekly basis in a 1-hour meeting. And we're like overly qualified life coaches. So many of our students are not living on campus, but even if they were, or they were any kind of social situation that they're struggling with, they get to meet with the program coordinator weekly and get their own tips and tricks about how to handle that, how to become, more engaged in the school environment. And I think that's frequently what we hear from parents and students, how they feel so supported, how they have a little community within the campus community, how they're able to take the skills they've learned in high school and actually use it in a real world setting, has been some of the greatest pieces, I think, of any college experience. But specifically getting to work with those trained professionals who can kind of blend in at college steps has been super helpful for our students.
Wonderful, thank you. And I know a few people mentioned a relationship with counseling, but because there are so many comorbidities between disabilities and mental health, I'm just wondering if you could share any, connections you may have, or is that a separate process related to getting accommodations for mental health?
At University of Maryland, even though we're part of the counseling center, we do not have mental health therapists a part of our direct unit, or more like sister units. So if some at University of Maryland, being that we are, as I mentioned earlier, about 50,000 students, there's no way that our college would be able to have a psychologist or a therapist for one-on-one therapy for 50,000 students, year round. So there is a limit on the number of individualized one-on-one mental health counseling sessions that they can have. They limit it, I believe it's 10 per calendar year. But what they do offer is group offerings and free resources. They have like anxiety toolbox things that like you can watch in and enjoy free classes and offerings that aren't that one-on-one therapy based related to that. But in terms of accommodations, you can have anxiety and need extra time on exams or those types of academic or housing accommodations. For a mental health based diagnosis would follow the same procedures to get accommodations. But if you were looking more so for that treatment based or intervention based, that would be a separate office on my campus, at least.
Yeah, mine too. We are the office that is responsible for providing accommodations, like Tessa said. And we often find that our students that have anxiety, like Tessa said, like to use our testing center where students can receive extra time, just because knowing that they have the extra time and knowing that they're in a more comfortable, more inviting environment where there's a water jug and a big bowl of candy and a friendly face, sometimes that helps them to avoid the anxiety that often comes with high stakes testing. But so we provide the accommodations, but again, if you are looking for treatment or counseling, we do have a counseling center at Hofstra, and we do refer students back and forth. But even though we're much smaller than the University of Maryland, all of our students couldn't go to our counseling center for regular counseling appointments that are individual either. I mean, that's just impossible.
Hobart and William Smith has the same model. I think it's pretty standard for counseling services to be separate from disability services accommodations, but collaborative.
Ours are separate too, but I think something that COVID changed is that telehealth is very available to students now, and a lot of them continue on with their own private therapist. But if they do run into some difficulty and need immediately to see somebody, our counseling center can fit them in.
Yeah, and our program coordinators do is they will help connect a student's team. What all colleges have set up is a mini world within a world. It models the employment world, the social world, and how mental health services work in, after college. So our program coordinators work closely with teams to make sure if a student has a therapist that they're included in our team, as well as making sure the students connected to services that are available on campus and giving them the tools to access those independently, to follow through on making appointments, attending appointments, those skills that go into maintaining your personal mental health. We also have a series on mind body health where we're teaching students mindfulness and anxiety strategies. They can attend that virtually as well as in person as part of our program.
Great, awesome. Another question that we got was, so your child, gets admitted and is excited to go, and the question is like, when? So when is the best time to start to like really reach out and start the process?
At our school, as soon as you get your Sacred Heart email, you can start the process. And it's always better to do that over the summer. We will meet virtually with a student if that's easier, if they want to have their family involved, that's certainly their choice. But just so that students know, if you have that good solid documentation, it's a matter of us reading it and then we're meeting together to decide. So you could have accommodations in a matter of hours, and your professors get their accommodation letters electronically. So you could work it very rapidly, but like I said before, it's best to not wait till the last minute to do that.
Same at Hobart and William Smith. As soon as you get your credentials, we'd love to hear from you, and you can set up your portal and submit your documentation, and we will be connected and we will start that process.
Same with me at Hofstra. As soon as you know you're going to be part of the Pride, we want to hear from you.
Similar at Maryland, but there is one change for us. For incoming students, we just ask you, you can get on the calendar prior to this, but we won't be able to confirm your accommodations while the spring semester is still underway, just because we have to make ourselves available for students who are currently taking classes. So Maryland graduates, May, almost this time, and 2 months from now, end of May. So I usually welcome families to get on our calendar after Memorial Day. But as Kathy said, it's a big shift, because you can go from a process that may take months in high school to like, I've literally met with students an hour before their first class and they have everything they need. So you can also meet with someone in the middle of July and they never disclose until after Thanksgiving. So that personal piece, we work pretty quickly, and then it's up to the student to then take the next step to disclose.
So with College Steps, we start the process with you pretty early. It's a little bit different on our end. I'm already accepting students for next fall now, and we start our process through our ICP, sitting down, talking about goals and planning. pretty early, so right away in the beginning of the summer. And then we're working with students through the process at the college, making sure that you're ticking off all those boxes to get in touch with these offices.
Yeah, we work pretty closely with the directors of accessibility services to help with all the submission of paperwork and making sure students have those meetings as well.
And then we have one or two kind of more specific questions. One was, could a lesson be video recorded as an accommodation?
Again,
That's tough.
COVID really
Yeah, it
threw a wrench in
depends.
that one. I think we all used to have a patented answer, but we had to transition because we went remote for a while. We transitioned back to being a full in-person college with some hybrid courses. And I did have one student who still expected to have the video recording. It really would depend on your documentation, what your diagnosis was, and if it was reasonable. So I had a student who was in the graduate program, in the OT program, and it was not reasonable, first of all, because they're discussing confidential information about the clients because they're actually doing clinicals. And they're also expected to go home and do a clinical evaluation based on what they learned that day, and then they discuss it the next day. So she would have all the answers, kind of thing. So we have to consider the essential functions of each course that you're taking. And your accommodation, regardless whether it's a video recording or any other accommodation, cannot interfere with the essential functions. And what that means is what you're there to learn. An essential function wouldn't be the way in which it's taught or the way in which you demonstrate it's being learned, but what you're actually supposed to be learning. The accommodation cannot impact that. If you're taking a speech class on giving public speaking, you can't have an accommodation of not having to do presentations. So it really comes down to the essential functions. Many of our professors kind of list the essential functions in a program in the syllabus so that students know what they're contracting in to learn and how they're going to learn. But we always help both the professors and the students to tease out what the essential functions are. I have to say that it is odd. It's not very often that we would give that particular accommodation, but we do use, I think Julie was talking about software for note taking, and that is technically a recording of the class. It's not a video recording, it's an audio recording. We use Glean, which you can put a marker in to where you need to pay attention to that particular part of the class and then go back and just listen to that section of the lecture. So that is a recording, but that is specifically for students who are having great difficulty with note taking and couldn't pass the course without that.
Yeah, I would add, like, that may not be as useful as many people picture it because of what Kathy said, right? If you have a 3-hour-long class and you're recording it, then the student needs to find time to go back and rewatch that 3-hour-long class, and they're still going to have to find the important information. So typically when teams ask us for that, or sometimes even sound recording or asking for the mentor to write down everything that the professor said, that's not as useful as we would picture. These technologies are really super helpful in teaching the students the note-taking skills so that they can pull that information out is more useful than, taping the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think some people, it's a knee-jerk reaction to ask for that because during COVID, people got accustomed to it, right? That was the mode of delivery for a lot of students, and they just got used to it, and so they're asking for it. It's probably not in your best interest most of the time, right? And also what Kathy said, at Hofstra, it depends on your program and the course requirements and the professor, right? In some college environments, that kind of technology has probably been used for a long time and is readily available. I mean, I remember seeing YouTube videos of MIT lectures years ago, right? But it's really individual. You have to ask, right? And at Hofstra, I can't offer that as a blanket accommodation. I have to consult with the professor and find out if that is acceptable given the course and the professor.
I would also say part of the process to determine if that's appropriate, we also have to look at, is it an equitable education experience? A lot of college classes involve, if you're in a writing class, for example, let's swap papers with each other and, provide feedback. There's a lot of, at Maryland, our classes are actually broken up into lecture and a discussion section. And so if there are any types of small group work, if you were, logged in like we're on right now with a lecture and everyone else is in person, is that equitable if you're almost ignored, right? How do you get equal attention to people who are physically in the room and also on the screen? But the other thing is we can't change the modality of the course, or some classrooms may not be equipped to video record. Is also important. You could have a lecture hall that has all the bells and whistles with the recording equipment, but then you could be assigned in a room that literally just has a chalkboard. So it may not actually be capable of recording things either.
And then one last question that we received was, and this is going to be so different according to every student is so different, but so for a student with significant dyslexia, what kinds of accommodations would you generally see at your schools?
I think this was mentioned by someone else earlier, but accessible books, right? Accessible reading material that is provided in an accessible format, and dictation software, right? Students can learn how to use dictation software so that they don't have to write or type individual letters, and these softwares are often artificially intelligent, so they learn the students' patterns and language and vocabulary over time, right? So it requires investment by the student of time and effort, but well worth it for students who really can't decipher the printed word.
Sometimes it's as simple as in our testing center, a student, we okayed with the professor, but they needed to have scrap paper that had grids broken up into it so that they could compartmentalize the different parts of a very complex math program. And once we were able to have the professor approve that they could have, 5 pieces of scrap paper, the student just took off. But with trying to write it in the very small little, straight line wasn't going to work for him. But the speech to text software is wonderful, and they do have that for math now, which is Equatio, which is wonderful. So again, it's something that we tease out when we meet with the student, and then we will dig for resources and work with the professor.
Yeah. I have also seen folks with dyslexia benefit from an ability to not fill out a Scantron or those bubble answer sheets, if that's a particular concern of, mismarking those, or then just figuring the time lost in navigating, filling them out correctly. So I've also seen no matter what the level of severity is for dyslexia, where that has been quite helpful for folks.
Well, on that note, just because I like to be very on time too, we are going to wrap up the panel. We are so appreciative to this phenomenal group of experts. Every year it's amazing, and this year is no exception. I mean, just such a wealth of information. I wanted to let everyone know that we are recording this, and we will be sending out the recording along with contact information for our wonderful panelists, which they have graciously offered. So we appreciate all your time, and thanks for everyone for joining us, and have a good evening.
Thank
Thank
you
you
all.
all.
Take care.
Good night.